an assessment of the first 100 days of the Lee Jae-myung government of South Korea. Next on The Impossible State. North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become one of the United States' top national security priorities. Each week on this show, we'll talk to the people who know the most about North Korea. Welcome to another episode of the CSIS Impossible State podcast. I'm your host, Victor Cha, President of Geopolitics and Foreign Policy and Korea Chair at CSIS and Professor at Georgetown University. Today we're going to talk about the first 100 days of the Lee Jae-myung government in South Korea. As you know, for our viewers and listeners on The Impossible State, we try to do all of our podcasts in studio. And so we love to take advantage of the fact that whenever we have guests visiting us from South Korea, we love to have them come and join us on set in the Impossible State podcast. And so today, we're very fortunate to have 2 guests with us from South Korea who were here for meetings at CSIS earlier, and then we begged them to be on the Impossible State podcast after our meetings in Korea. And so here we are. So let me properly introduce them. The first is Dr. Jeonghun Min, who is, and I should say both of our guests are scholars in South Korea, but they also went to great American universities to do their PhD. So starting with Dr. Jeonghun Min, who is a professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. The Korea National Diplomatic Academy is one of the foremost training affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and trains South Korea's diplomats. He has also been working as a policy advisor for the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Unification. He conducts research on U.S. ROK relations, North Korea-U.S. relations, U.S.-China strategic competition, as well as American politics. He received his PhD from the great University of Georgia in political science. Also joining us is Dr. Hanbeom, who is professor at the Korea National Defense University. That is the academic arm affiliated with the Ministry of National Defense. He is also a member of the Space Security Working Board of the Korea National Space Council and has also served as a member of the Presidential Advisory Committee for National Policy Planning. He is also president-elect of the Korean Association of International Studies. So for any of our viewers who are academics, the Korea Association for International Studies is sort of the big umbrella organization for, in particular, scholars working on foreign policy and international affairs. He graduated from Korea University and did his PhD in political science at another great American university, the University of Kentucky. So thank you both for joining us today on the Impossible State podcast to talk about the first 100 days of the Lee Jae-myung government. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think we'd like to start with you, Professor Jeong, and let's just start with the very basic question of, this is the first 100 days of President Lee. He did this terrific interview for Newsweek magazine to talk about his overall approach. How would you first assess his 100 days in office?
Okay, I may say that it was a time for a soft landing of Korean government's diplomacy. Mm-hmm. As you know, Korea experienced the harsh conditions and harsh days in domestic and internationally. Actually, the state itself stopped, and then the government malfunctioned for more than 6 months.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it was time for resurrection and then reconciliations. So during the 100 days, actually, President Lee made an effort to rebuild up the Korea-U.S. alliance and then trilateral cooperation among Korea, U.S., and Japan. And probably I think that the Korean government actually found some the chance to manage and rebuild up the relations with China too. And then now the Korea government and President Lee is trying to find a way to contact the North Korea and Kim Jong-un. So we will see that even though it was not perfect, it was a good time for rebuilding Korean diplomacy.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine more adverse conditions under which someone could become president of a country, right? A 6-month, as you said, political crisis, a snap election, and then no transition period, right? The next day they move into office and they start work. I think in his Newsweek interview, he said literally that they walked into the office and there were no computers, and like it was all the things that we associate with a smooth transition did not happen because of the political crisis in Korea. Professor Min, is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of the first 100 days of the administration?
Yes, basically, I agree with what Dr. Jeong mentioned about his assessment of the President Lee Jae-myung's first 100 days in office. And let me put them in different words. And I think that President Lee Jae-myung has been doing a great job during his first 100 days in office in 2 aspects. First aspect is the restoring summit diplomacy. And the second aspect is put the solid foundation for his government's national interest-driven pragmatic diplomacy. On the one hand, as Dr. Jeong mentioned, President Lee Jae-myung has restored the summit diplomacy after taking office. As you know, South Korea suffered from the political chaos due to the unconstitutional national law in December, and also had to go through the absence of the diplomatic leadership for about 6 months. And many things happened during that period of time, including the President Trump's inauguration in January, and South Korea diplomacy had a hard time coping with those important diplomatic issues, and it was hard to secure its national interests. And but the President Lee's inauguration changed the situation, and South Korea has restored the diplomatic leadership. And the situation for the South Korean diplomacy has been fully recovered. So everything seems to be normalized after President Lee's taking office in June. And on the other hand, I think Lee Jae-myung government has established a solid foundation for its national interest-driven pragmatic diplomacy during the first 100 days in office. As you know, the Lee Jae-myung government is further strengthening the ROK and U.S. alliance and developing the alliance into a future-oriented, comprehensive strategic alliance. In addition, the ROK and U.S. alliance is being evolved into leading regional platforms that extend beyond the Korean Peninsula, and its identity is being solidified as an exemplary alliance in the Indo-Pacific by enhancing cooperation across key domains like advanced technologies and the development cooperation, maritime security, and disaster relief and defense industry. In the meantime, meanwhile, the Lee government's pragmatic diplomacy tries to cultivate a favorable strategic environment for South Korea in East Asia. As you know, specifically based on the robust ROK and U.S. alliance, Lee government is trying to strengthen the trilateral cooperation with the U.S., South Korea, and Japan, while it also tries to advance the bilateral relationships with Japan. So a very good sign for the regional cooperation among the key players in East Asia, like the South Korea, U.S., and Japan. So overall, based on what has achieved diplomatically during the first 100 days in office, Lee Jae-myung government will extend the scope of its pragmatic diplomacy in the coming months and years. And again, its solid foundation will continue to be in the robust and strong ROK and U.S. alliance.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks to both of you for that initial assessment. Next, can I ask you, like, what is the public opinion in South Korea regarding, in particular, not so much domestic policy, but President Lee's foreign policy thus far? Has there been general support for it? There was a big agreement on tariffs and investment. What has sort of been the public reaction with regard to President Lee's all these initial moves you said that he's made on foreign policy? How has the public responded to that? Dr. Jeong.
Okay, let me talk about what the polls and commentaries so far suggest about the public opinion in South Korea toward President Lee's foreign policy. Lee's approval rating has generally been strong since he took office. Multiple polls place him above 60%, even though there have been fluctuations. A key theme in public expectation is that Lee actually restores a sense of steady and competent governance after erratic behavior under the previous administrations. His promise of pragmatic diplomacy resonates with voters who are tired of ideological polarization and want foreign policy that offsets risk and protects economic interest and handles security threats in a realistic manner. So,
Yeah, Dr. Min.
Yes, I think President Lee Jae-myung and the government's foreign policy has been well received by the Korean public so far. For example, there was a poll conducted by the Korea Gallup, and it asked the Korean respondents how they assessed Lee government's 100 days in office, and the results show that diplomacy was placed almost at the top of the agendas. Specifically, about 47% of the respondents answered that Lee government did a good job in diplomacy. And among the top agendas, there were the welfare policy, 50% positive assessments, and economy, 43%, and North Korea, 37%, or something like that. And compare with the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government, the current Lee Jae-myung governments were better evaluated in the agendas of welfare, diplomacy, and economy. So specifically, only 29% of the respondents answered that Yoon Suk-yeol government did a good job in diplomacy during his first 100 days in office. So overall, I think the voters and the respondents in South Korea positively evaluated what President Lee has done only in his term, his term in office. Of all, I think 58% of respondents answered that President Lee did a good job during his first 100 days in office, and among them, about 90% his party supporters, Democratic Party supporters, and 60% of independents or moderates evaluated President Lee's job positively. So we can say that President Lee is very popular among the public so far, and I think it has been the major political foundation that President Lee is strongly pursuing his main agendas.
So that's interesting. In particular, so 90% of his party supports his policy, and so we would expect to see that. But the 60% of independents and self-proclaimed moderates, that's an interesting number because that's a very high number.
Yes,
for ones that are not in his party. But how much of that do you think is the so-called honeymoon period? Because new leaders always get a honeymoon period, right? Where in general people are trying to be positive moving forward, And how much of you think of that will last beyond the honeymoon period?
Well, the study showed that typically honeymoon period will last about 6 months. But think about the political calendars that South Korea has. For this year, later this year, and the earlier next year, the South Korea will have the local elections in the April next year.
Right, yeah.
So it depends on how well the ruling party has got the good outcomes in the upcoming local elections. If the ruling party has got the good results in the local election, it will particularly affect the President Lee's job approval ratings.
Right.
And it will also give a really important political momentum to President Lee Jae-myung about pursuing his major political agendas. So I think that most politicians in South Korea really care about the results of the upcoming local elections, and then they are really working hard to get the good outcomes from it.
Yeah, yeah. So those local elections you said are April of 2026, is that right? April 2026?
Yes, 2026, yes.
Right. So basically from June of 2025 to April 2026, this is sort of the performance period for President Lee, and that will be the next. I mean, his election was one metric. The next metric will be in April when voters will go to the polls not for the legislatures, but for mayors and governors and local elections. But that will be an important referendum, if you will, on the performance for the first. Well, it's less than a year, but still. Yeah, the political calendar in Korea is so intense. It's so intense. Let's move and talk about what President Lee has wanted to do in terms of inter-Korean relations and North Korea. So he's clearly made this one of the things that one of his foreign policy, one of his policy objectives is to improve inter-Korean relations. I feel like every time a president from the DP or previous from progressive side of the spectrum comes into office, they feel like a lot of time has been lost when the DP was not in power because the previous conservative government would let inter-Korean relations languish or get even worse. And so they feel like there's a great imperative here. President Lee has already taken some initial unilateral confidence-building measures, stopping the broadcasts across the DMZ, I think stopping the balloon launches also. So unilateral gestures on things that we know make the North Koreans very angry and upset because Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, has been very vocal about speaking about these things. But thus far, so the question is, will this be successful? There doesn't seem to have been a response by North Korea yet. In fact, there's been a negative response by North Korea. Kim Jong-un has expressed no interest in dialogue with South Korea as recently as 2 days ago. But then his speech was then translated into English and released in English, making clear he is not interested. So how successful do you think President Lee is going to do in terms of improving inter-Korean relations? And what else do you think he needs to do to try to improve the relationship? Dr. Chung.
Actually, frankly speaking, I'm not so optimistic on improving the inter-Korean relations soon. But today, President Lee actually showed his policy as called as a END, exchange, normalization, and denuclearization. But as you said, that the North Korea is not interested in cooperation with South Korea, and then I think the North Korea and Kim Jong-un is so confident that they may survive without South Korea. So Actually, South Korea faces very delicate task. So Pyongyang has shut down nearly all official contact since 2019, and prospects of Kim Jong-un showing up at the multilateral venues like the APEC summit were always slim. There are the main levers available now, so we can think. Instead of demanding perfect denuclearization upfront, Seoul can push for small, verifiable agreements like military hotlines, family reunions, or limited arms control steps.
Mm-hmm.
Second choice is using track 2 diplomacy. NGOs, academics, or humanitarian groups can maintain contact even when official talks are frozen. So these back channels sometimes lay groundwork for future government negotiations. Obviously, the best scenario is the U.S. plays a peacemaker by resuming a dialogue with North Korea. As President Lee told in the summit with Donald Trump. South Korea cannot force North Korea to negotiate. What it can do is creating a mix of pressure and engagement, maintaining deterrence with Washington. So now we see that the U.S. is a very important player to build up the South and North Korea relations.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Min.
Yes, I agree with what Dr. Jeong mentioned about the current situation about inter-Korean relations and important U.S. roles in terms of the improving the security situation on the Korean Peninsula. Like Dr. Jeong mentioned, I don't think that the inter-Korean relations will get better soon. It'll take time, but the Lee Jae-myung government will do their jobs in terms of the easing the tensions on the Korean Peninsula. As President Lee Jae-myung mentioned, it is necessary for South Korean government to do something to reduce Korea risk and turn it into the Korea premium to revitalize its economy and stabilize the social economic situations on the peninsula. That's the one axis of for the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and the other axis or the other aspects of the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula is the important role of the Trump government, or the President Trump's role in terms of the peacemaker and the pacemaker of the South Korean president. Lee Jae-myung government they clearly recognized why and how the previous Moon Jae-in government failed in terms of the marching toward the peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. They clearly remembered what happened back in 2018 and 2019. So the Lee Jae-myung government doesn't want to go back to to make the same mistake as the Moon Jae-in government did in the past. So the Lee Jae-myung government want to put the priority for the President Trump's active role in terms of the improving or the revitalizing the summit diplomacy with the Chairman Kim Jong-un, with the North Korean leader. And the South Korean government, as a pacemaker, will support and assist President Trump to the revitalized summit diplomacy and resume the negotiating talks between them. And actually, what we want is to the situation where we can have the Hanbeom negotiation 2.0, which means the South Korea, North Korea, U.S. negotiation 2.0, what happened back in 2018. But the main difference between the past and now is that South Korea will not lead the negotiations. Instead, we'll just sit in the back seat and just help what President Trump is doing to improve his relationships with Chairman Kim and overall the denuclearization negotiations with North Korea. So the South Korea is ready to propose the acceptable denuclearization roadmap to the United States, the Trump government, like what we did in the past in the 1990s, the six-part talks. The South Korean government did a good job in terms of providing the alternatives for the negotiations. And in the 2010s, the Moon Jae government also proposed the acceptable denuclearization roadmap to both U.S. and North Korea. So like what we did in the past, Lee governments is willing to propose the acceptable denuclearization roadmap to the Trump government, and it will also bring in the important financial resources and technologies when North Korea and the U.S. Will talk about how they will vitalize its own economy and eventually march toward the economic prosperity in North Korea, like what Trump mentioned, the building some condos and the resort and the Wonsan-Galma, the area, like the project. So South Korea, the Lee government will do those things at the back that support what President Trump is doing. So we will just President Lee Jae-myung will be the pacemaker, and just will do whatever it is necessary to make a progress in terms of the stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula.
Yeah. So I think the Trump administration, or President Trump in particular, has made very clear that he wants to re-engage with Kim Jong-un, right? In the Oval Office on August 25th, when President Lee and President Trump met, they spent a good part of that press conference talking about, President Trump talked a great deal about his friendship with Kim Jong-un, his willingness to re-engage. And I thought it was a very interesting, we've never seen anything like that, a very interesting public signaling to North Korea, because you never know if the private signaling is actually getting to the top. But a very public signaling by the President Trump in the Oval Office saying, I want to meet with Kim Jong-un. And then in response to a question, he said, yes, I want to meet with Kim Jong-un before the end of this year, right? So that was really extraordinary. And I mean, only President Trump can execute diplomacy in this way. It's very unconventional, but very direct and very clear. And I thought it was interesting that Kim Jong-un has essentially responded to that by saying, I think he said, what did he say? He says, I remember my friendship with President Trump, or he made some very positive comment about President Trump. But he also laid down a very clear condition, which was that we are not talking about denuclearization. We are not talking about denuclearization is not the conversation that he wants to have. He's happy to talk to President Trump, but not on the condition of denuclearization. So I think we saw President Lee drawing President Trump into a conversation in public about re-engaging, and President Trump did, and I think he really believes it. Like, he really believes he has a relationship with Kim Jong-un, President Trump does, and that he wants to re-engage because he's been the only U.S. president to really acting U.S. president to do that. But then Kim Jong-un's response was very clear: happy to re-engage, but not under the condition of denuclearization. So that's a real dilemma, I think, and maybe there's a way that they can figure out how to meet, and for one side to say it's about denuclearization and for the other side to say it's not about denuclearization. But
that's diplomacy.
That's diplomacy, right, exactly. That's diplomacy. And we have a series of opportunities coming up because President Trump is coming to Korea for Gyeongju for APEC at the end of October. Then there's also where he'll probably meet with Xi Jinping. And then there will also potentially be other opportunities if President Trump goes to China in early 2026, which some people have speculated. So it's interesting. And then the other interesting thing, based on your comments that I'm hearing, is that you're saying that the Lee government does or will have a plan for to talk about denuclearization that they are working on, right? And that if President Trump is sort of doing the high-level diplomacy to engage the North Korean leader, but what I hear you saying is that South Korea has or is working on a plan for denuclearization. We've had past agreements, the 94 Agreed Framework, the six-party talks, and that there is another plan that is being worked on. So that's interesting. The last question is really about China. And so when President Lee came here to Washington and met with President Trump in the White House, and then after that, as our viewers know, he then came to CSIS. Your president came to CSIS and gave a speech here in which he talked about China, and what he said was that South Korea could not help but stand with the United States' basic policy stance when it came to China, but there were also, practically speaking, things that South Korea needed to engage with China on because China is the most immediate neighbor. And so I guess for many, this was an interesting statement. It was the notion that the basic policy stance was with the United States was something that we've not really heard before from South Korean leaders, but also this condition that they still needed to engage with China, practically speaking, because they're right next door, they're a big economic partner, things of that nature. So I think many of our listeners would want to understand how do you interpret that particular policy? So, Dr. Chung, how would you interpret what President Lee said?
Yeah, actually, it is obvious that President Lee's priority in Korean diplomacy is the Korea-U.S. alliance. Then, even though the alliance between Korea and U.S. and then trilateral cooperation among Korea, U.S., and Japan are important. We still need to manage the ties to China because China is a neighboring country. Probably you will remember that President Lee actually said that South Korea will stand together with the United States in the interview with Time magazine. At that time interview, that South Korea will stand together with the United States is a strong reaffirmation of the alliance. I believe in the interview, President Lee intended to reassure Washington that Seoul is not wavering in the face of North Korean provocation, Chinese assertiveness, or global conflicts. It also sets a clear baseline before APEC, even as Lee pursued outreach to President Xi. The alliance with the United States is Seoul's anchor. It is true that Beijing views Korea-U.S. alignment as part of a broader U.S. containment strategy. Any language that sounds like choosing sides feeds Chinese concerns that Seoul is becoming a frontline ally in Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. China has previously retaliated economically against South Korea when it felt South Korea's security cooperation with the U.S. Crossed Beijing's red lines. The SAD crisis.
Yeah,
Yes,
of course.
Yeah, if Seoul emphasizes alliance solidarity too heavily, then Beijing may be less inclined to cooperate on inter-Korean issues and could even loosen sanctions enforcement on North Korea to remind Seoul of its leverage. But I also believe there is Chinese needs to cooperate with Korea, and they are aware of South Korea's dilemma. So their response would not be so direct and simple. So now it is important keeping the alliance firm and managing the relations with China and Korea it's important.
Right. Thank you. Dr. Min?
Yes, I think that the Lee Jae-myung government tries to establish a strategic position between U.S. and China. As you know, there was a term like what my president mentioned when he visited here, CSIS, and there was a term 안미경중, which means U.S. for security and China for economy for South Korea. But the term, I think, does not work for any South Korea anymore. Of course, it's still true that South Korea works closely with the U.S. for its traditional security, hard security, but on the economic side, situation have changed. As you know, the U.S.-China strategic competition has been focused on the advanced technologies and strategic industries, and the U.S. want to reshape the global value chains following its own national interests and restore its manufacturing capabilities. And considering that U.S. has got the foundational technologies and is leading the high-tech industries and advanced technologies, it is inevitable for South Korea to work closely with the U.S. for securing its engine for the future economic growth and prosperity. In other words, these high-tech industries or advanced technologies consist of the core of the South Korea's future economic prosperity, and therefore South Korea needed to maintain or enhance its competitiveness by closely working together with the front runners of the fields like US, Japan, and Europe. So it means that South Korea cannot go against US policy directions for at least the high-tech industries and advanced technologies. It's a hard, cold fact that South Korea has now, and China, I think, needed to understand, accept it. It would be a new normal for South Korea positions. So South Korea has now strategic environments that it needed to work closely with the U.S. for both security and economy and technology. But meanwhile, South Korea also needed to manage its relations with China favorably because, as you mentioned, it's an important trade partner and important neighboring country of South Korea, and it can also play a significant role in dealing with North Korean problems. So Seoul wants to maintain and improve its communication and cooperation with China. Specifically, South Korea can maintain traditional trade with China other than high-tech industries or advanced technologies as a neighboring country. And it can also improve its economic cooperation with China in the form of the trilateral cooperation with South Korea, China, and Japan. So the major regional countries, the economic cooperation for whatever they need. And overall, I think that this new situation can be called 안미 경세, which means the U.S. for security and U.S. and other advanced countries for economy and the technology. Se means the world, advanced countries, including the United States. And I think this is the new normal for the South Korea's position between U.S. and China. So basically, I think that it shows that South Korea is getting close to the United States, and the ROK U.S. alliance is getting more important.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a very interesting discussion because I think what President Lee said here at CSIS really represented something that was a real change in the alliance. I mean, and for the United States, it's not partisan. It's been bipartisan. It was in Trump 1, and it was in Biden, and now we see it in Trump 2. This notion that when it comes to China, the United States and its allies certainly need to de-risk, right? So, China hit South Korea on THAAD in 2016, 2017. So Korea's had experience with this. So they need to de-risk. But de-risking means you still stay in contact with China. You're still trading with China. But the United States put forward this argument that in certain key sectors, high-tech sectors, that the United States and its partners, we don't only need to de-risk, we need to decouple, right? And this was things like export controls, the CHIPS Act, all these things. And I think Korea participated reluctantly in the beginning in these things, but the statements made by President Lee are essentially saying, as you said, this is the new reality. And that, yes, there's de-risking, which still means trading with China, but in certain areas, in high-tech sort of, whether it's semiconductors, quantum, AI, biotech, that there needs to be some decoupling and working with, as you said, the world, and not necessarily with China, because the technology and everything is here, it's not over there. So I thought that was a very big and important statement that really almost came full circle from when this conversation between the United States and Korea started, really in the first Trump administration, then through Biden, and now in the second Trump administration. So that's a very interesting observation. I want to, Dr. Jeong and Dr. Min, thank you so much for joining us. You come a long way from Korea to be with us here on the Impossible State podcast. This is the late afternoon where we're taping this, so you must be very tired, jet lagged.
Actually, it is early in the morning in Korea.
Oh, so you're just waking up now. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you again for joining us for this very interesting discussion on President Lee Jae-myung's first 100 days in office. Thank you to our viewers and listeners on The Possible State for joining us. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode of The Impossible State.